Julia was expecting a baby. Recently, her family has been busy with the pleasant chores of preparing for the birth of a baby. There were only a few days left before the birth. The future grandfather grumbled, "What are you preparing for the reception of the minister?" "And why not the minister?" "You'll see, Dad, our minister will appear soon and will command us. It's a pity that my husband is on a business trip." "I'm with you, daughter. Don't worry. Everything will be fine," Mom said encouragingly. "My grandfather and I will help." In the morning, the contractions started on time. Julia's mother called an ambulance and began to take her daughter to the hospital, but for some reason everything was falling out of hand. "What is it? Why am I so worried?" she asked herself. Everything will be fine. Although she understood that the first birth was a difficult ordeal for any organism. Meanwhile, her daughter was already screaming in pain, "Mom, I can't. It hurts. When will the ambulance arrive?" The ambulance arrived in 15 minutes. By this time, Julia had started bleeding. From the fear of blood loss, the pain twisted the girl even more. Mom was in a panic. She cried and demanded the help of a doctor. "Do something quickly, please." The doctor calmed them down. "Calm down, Mom. You're scaring your daughter." There was obvious concern on her face. "Quickly apply ice. Let's put her on a stretcher." The father helped the nurse with the stretcher, accompanied his wife and daughter to the ambulance. After seeing them off, he went home holding his heart. At the hospital, Julia was immediately taken to the intensive care unit. All the doctors came running. The mother was rushing down the corridor to the intensive care unit. All her thoughts were about her daughter. She doesn't remember how much time has passed. She woke up when the doctor came out. Lowering their eyes, he said, "We did our best, but we couldn't stop the bleeding." Her heart stopped. "The child is a boy. He is alive." He talked for a long time about what they had done to bring her back to life. But her mother didn't hear or understand anything. The news of her daughter's death blocked her brain. The brain refused to accept the tragic news. Then she suddenly realized what had happened, and a cry of despair echoed throughout the department. It took a while to bring her to her senses. Soon Julia, wrapped in a sheet, was wheeled out on a gurney. Her mother rushed to her side. "My daughter." "How so?" On the same gurney, the dead woman in labor was taken to the morgue, which was next to the intensive care unit. Her mother walked beside her daughter and wept bitterly. Of course, they wouldn't let her into the morgue. They advised her to go home. But she remained standing under the doors, behind which the body of her beloved daughter disappeared. There were few dead people in the morgue that morning, so the doctors took care of the girl's body. When Julia was lying on the table, one of the nurses getting the body ready for an autopsy saw something strange about her and went to the doctor. "This girl doesn't look like a dead woman. She didn't stretch out, and the skin feels different, not like corpses." "It can't be. It seemed to you," the pathologist replied. Meanwhile, Julia's mother continued to stand near the morgue and did not leave. All the exhortations were in vain. The father drove up and also began to persuade his wife to return home. But she was adamant, as if she was still waiting for her daughter from the morgue. The woman clearly did not want to believe in what had happened. At this time, the morgue nurse examining the body suddenly noticed the barely noticeable movements of the deceased's eyeballs. They went to the doctor again. "Look at her. She looks like she's alive." The doctor looked at the death certificate sent from the intensive care unit. The moment of cardiac arrest recorded there made it impossible to believe in a resurrection. "It's been almost 2 hours. They went to the body, examined it, and felt it. The pulse is thready. Urgently to the intensive care unit," he shouted. The doctors put Julia back on the stretcher and quickly took her to the intensive care unit. When the daughter was taken out of the morgue with her face open, the mother knew everything right away. She was alive and lost consciousness. Julia was saved. Surprisingly, her heart started working when she was already presumed dead. It was decided not to tell the young mother about the incident, so as not to expose her body to stress. This case has been thoroughly investigated. A commission has arrived from the region. Intensive care specialists broke the rules. The dead patient should stay in the hospital for at least 2 hours to show they are alive, check for changes in their early and late signs. But the doctors hurried and sent a living person to the morgue, not meeting the deadlines. Some of the medical staff were punished. The head of the intensive care unit was fired. 2 weeks later, her husband took Julia and her baby out of the hospital. He returned from a business trip. That day, his parents did not tell him about his wife who could have died, but they said only good things about their son. And so when the whole family gathered, they were told this terrible story with a happy ending. The shocked son-in-law hugged his wife tightly, and she looked gratefully into the eyes of her parents, who had turned gray ahead of time. Their baby was sleeping peacefully in the next room, not even suspecting that he almost lost his mother at birth. At that time, I was 16 years old. I had just graduated from high school, entered one of the universities of the city of Paris. Since I do not live in the city itself, but in the region, I had to look for an apartment with a classmate's friend. As it turned out, it's not so easy at the end of August, when students start rushing around in search of housing. We looked at 3 options, but none of them worked for us. The condition was bad, and they asked for a lot of money. And so in the evening, we arranged a meeting with a real estate agent to see the latest version. We really liked the apartment. Everything is in place, it's true, it's old. Well, God be with it. The water is hot, the kitchen is fully equipped, furniture, carpets, dishes are even there. Everything was in its place. And the price was offered symbolic $1,000. My friend and I were delighted. Such an apartment, cheap and close to the university in the center. That was our first mistake. We didn't think about why it was so cheap. In general, we agreed. It is noteworthy that our host lived on the first floor, we are on the 5th. I'll start from this moment. Why did our host have 2 apartments and 1 entrance? It turned out that our grandmother lived in our apartment, who had been lying for 12 years, and Aunt Olia took care of her all these years, for which she gave her this ill-fated living space in gratitude. This grandmother died in April. The apartment was rented to us in September. That is, less than 6 months had passed since her death. And so stopping there, we asked her to put away all her things. She took all her grandmother's things, of which there were many clothes, rags, even a stick. The host removed this trash as much as she could, but asked for one thing: not to take off the icon that stood on the trellis, because her late grandmother had asked her to do so. At that time, we did not attach much importance to this request. This was our second mistake. The next day, I noticed one strange thing when I opened the door to a common hallway. Small family houses where there are 2 hallways on the floor, and each has a common door, and our apartment was right opposite, at the very end in a hallway that was almost dark. I felt that. That's terrible. As I approached the front door, the horror grew. Everything is frozen in the apartment. But there are apartments in which it is warm, bright, cozy, joyful, enlightened. They are pleasant to be in, but there are also gloomy, cloudy ones with a heavy atmosphere, a feeling of how the air presses on you. Apartments that you want to leave as soon as possible. That's how it was with us. Everyone who came up to me for at least a few minutes told me about it. They said it radiated coldness, rejection. And so, a week later, the first unusual case occurred. My friend and I came after the lectures, cooked dinner together, and went to the room to do our homework. After a couple of hours, I got thirsty, and I went to the kitchen to pour water. Imagine my surprise when I discovered that our refrigerator was turned off, that is, unplugged. Neither of us had done it, and we both remembered exactly what it had been buzzing about a few minutes ago. As it turned out later, it took a lot of effort to pull the plug out of the socket. But we laughed, thinking that we had fully learned our lesson. I couldn't sleep that night. Something was bothering me, and at midnight I'll explain later why I set the time so precisely. The doorbell rang. I was horrified by the fact that in such houses the floors are wooden, and you can always clearly hear when someone is walking down the corridor. But I didn't hear anything. I quietly called my friend. She, as it turned out, woke up from this call. We waited for an hour, trying not to move, and calmed down. You never know a drunken neighbor. We had Uncle Stefan there, who came to ask for potatoes or pasta. Uncle Stefan was also one of the mysteries of this house, but we'll talk about that later. We started to fall asleep. Suddenly, 2 hours later, the phone rang again. Again, I didn't hear anything. Then they called at 3 o'clock. In general, the calls were repeated twice a year, 2 days after 1 whole year with a short break of 2 months. This is why I remember that time so well. They sounded exactly on schedule. We already knew that they would be calling right now. My mom arrived a couple of weeks later and consecrated the apartment. The house where I grew up had a private bathroom. There was a tiny bathroom with barely enough room to change clothes, and a toilet that, apart from the toilet, had only half a toilet. There was a window in the wall separating the 2 rooms right under the ceiling. I have strange memories associated with this window. Anxious, as they like to say now. It happened when I was in the bathroom. I was about 5 years old. My mother still washed me by herself, but she could leave me alone in the bathroom for a while. I had a small plastic tub that my mother put in a large tub. Mom filled it with water and left me to soak in it while she cooked porridge in the kitchen. Of course, there was little point in soaking up. I just liked being left to myself and splashing in the tub in the company of rubber ducks, and my mother knew about it. I sat, dangled my feet in the water, and looked at the window in the wall, waiting for my grandfather. Grandpa usually appeared in the window almost as soon as Mom started confidently rattling pots in the kitchen. I waved happily at him. He waved back and then started making faces. He bared his teeth, squinted, and stuck his fingers in his nostrils. Sometimes he would put 2 index fingers in his mouth and spread them apart. It looked a little creepy, but funny, at least that's what I thought. In response, I laughed and made faces at my grandfather. He usually came out of the window almost as soon as my mother started confidently rattling pots in the kitchen. I waved happily at him. He waved back, and then began to pretend to be fairies. He bared his teeth, squinted, and stuck his fingers in his nostrils. Sometimes he would put 2 index fingers in his mouth and hold them out to me. It turned out to be a bit like a pancake, but funny, at least that's what it seemed to me. In response, I laughed and made faces at my grandfather. A minute later, Grandpa did his usual trick. He moved his ears. I couldn't see if he really moved his ears, and disappeared. After a while, my mother, despite my resistance, still came to wash me. Grandpa never came in her presence. No, of course, there would be nothing wrong with all this if it weren't for one thing. About 6 months ago, I asked my mom if she remembered how I joyfully told her Grandpa was just there, and he pointed to the window. About 6 months ago, I asked my mom if she remembered how I joyfully told her Grandpa was just there and he pointed to the window. By the way, yes, she said. Did you really see someone there? Or was it just your imagination? About 6 months ago, I asked my mom if she remembered how I joyfully told her Grandpa was just there and he pointed to the window. By the way, yes, she said. Did you really see someone there, or was it just your imagination? I was a little puzzled by this statement of the question. Your grandfather couldn't have been there, Mom explained, noticing the bewilderment in my gaze. He would have to stand on the toilet or on a chair to look in there, and he was already lying down. Don't you remember? I remember that. Indeed, my grandfather spent all of his time in bed, and when you were 6, he was already dead. As a child, I was not embarrassed that my grandfather was even taken to the toilet by the hand, but it was easy for him to fly up to the ceiling to make his grandson laugh. The details of the past clearly surfaced in my head, but they did not want to form a single picture. And they still don't add up. I just want to believe that the grandfather in the window was just a child's imagination. I try not to look for other reasons for this. My maternal grandfather did not accept Soviet power and did not join the collective farm. After the unfair removal, he started to feed his family. He walked around the villages with a sewing machine on his shoulders and made simple clothes for peasants made of cloth and sheepskin coats, and Armenian kaftans. A tailor was hired to work in the house for a week, or even 2 or 3 weeks, until he made everything the family needed. He was fed and paid for it. Of course, my grandfather was away from home for a long time. Sometimes he came back late at night. If the weather was bad, he spent the night in a haystack or in the woods under a Christmas tree. Upon his return, he talked interestingly about what kind of people he met, what unusual things he saw on the way. I remembered one of his stories for the rest of my life. My grandfather stayed for a long time in distant Mari villages, where he had many orders. When the old man was about to leave, the owners convinced him to stay until morning, but he did not agree, hoping to go home before night. They paid him, fed him on a walk, and in the evening he set off. It wasn't the first time my grandfather had been to these places and knew the way like the back of his hand. It was late autumn. A light frost and wind dried the dirt on the road, and Grandpa cheerfully headed home. However, when dusk fell, the grandfather, looking around, suddenly realized that he was lost. When it got dark, my grandfather started to walk around looking for places he knew. He usually went to his hometown. He wandered for a long time among ravines, copses, and hollows. He didn't have a watch, but he sensed that it was getting close to midnight, and suddenly he saw that a railway was passing next to him. This surprised him greatly, as he knew that there were no signs of a railroad for miles around. But then a light appeared in the distance, and soon a steam train ran past the old man, carrying several wagons behind it. When the train started, my grandfather decided to touch the rails. He knew from experience that after passing the train, the rails should be warm. But leaning over the railing, Grandfather did not feel them in the withered grass. No matter how much he searched, they disappeared as if they had never existed. The old man was seriously scared, thinking that something was wrong here. Praying to God to help him get out of this bad place, he went where he wanted and soon came out on a wide, rolled dirt road. He was delighted and stopped at the side of the road, wondering which way he should go next. A creaking sound was heard in the distance, and soon the silhouette of a horse tied to a cart with people sitting on it appeared out of the darkness. Grandfather couldn't see their faces, but he crossed himself and started to ask them to stop and tell him where they were from and where they were going so he could find his way on the road. But the horse and cart quickly sped past without even slowing down. And then my grandfather remembered what to do if you get lost. He quickly turned his outer clothes and hat inside out. He looked down at his feet. There was no asphalt road anymore, and he was not standing on its side, but on the edge of a deep and steep ravine. One more step forward, and he would have fallen headfirst into a deep pit, and it is unknown what would have happened to him next. My grandfather came to his old village in the early morning. He talked for a long time at home about his night journey. They say that sleep is a small death, but I think otherwise. What if a dream is someone's life? A short-term, fleeting, but nevertheless full-fledged life? What if falling asleep opens a window into other people's experiences, into other people's thoughts? And who knows, maybe what we see in a dream is a reality for someone. What if even our nightmares, after which we wake up on dirty sheets and try to see the dark, are not just a dream? I work as a psychiatrist in an ordinary, lousy city. There are not so many people in it, but also not a few. Everyone has their own problems, their own unresolved issues. Many of them turn to me for help, tell their stories, open their souls. That's how he came to me. From an ethical point of view, it would be wrong to reveal his name, so I will call him Mr. X, as in the old black and white detective stories. So the first time he came to me was on a fine summer day. A thin man in his 50s. Gray hair, a network of wrinkles, and heavy bags under the eyes. He sat down in a comfortable leather armchair, looked at me for a long time, and then began his story. Please listen to me. I know you won't help me, but you can write about it, and it means a lot. I've had nightmares since I was a kid. My parents took me to psychiatrists, healers, fortune tellers, nothing helped. I kept seeing them, living their lives, and he swallowed nervously, dying their deaths. Every night, falling asleep, I lived the lives of people unknown to me. I do not know how to explain it, but I was not a bystander. I was them, and they were me. And every night I die. Doctor, I've died 1,000 different deaths. It's frustrating as hell. Once when I was 15, I saw my neighbor in a dream. No, it was me. I was mowing the lawn near my country house when a sudden pain in my chest made me fall to the ground in fits. My eyes went dark and I woke up. The next day I found out that my neighbor had died prematurely of a heart attack, and so it is every night. At first I was looking for these people, they all died. That's all. I'm having a dream and a man is dying. In a week, at the latest. I can't do this anymore, doctor. He looked at me with pleading in his eyes. Do you think I'm an old man? Doctor, I'm 25. I've lived 1,000 lives. He smiled bitterly, but today is a special day. I saw myself in a dream. I'm going to get hit by a car today. Truck. On the corner behind your office. Write about it. Goodbye. With that, he left the office. I confess to you that during my practice I have heard more incredible stories. One way or another, there was always an explanation for them. However, something struck me this time. Maybe his eyes. Mr. X's eyes didn't look like the eyes of a madman. Rather, they were the eyes of a hunted beast. I ran out of the office like wild, dropping my car keys and getting tangled in the glass doors. Running out into the street, I saw him, proudly straightening his back, heading for the pedestrian crossing. Wait a minute. Wait, I screamed, holding my breath. He turned around, his mouth open, wanting to answer me, when suddenly a van came around the corner. It knocked him off his feet and carried him along the road, leaving a bright scarlet trail behind it. I don't know if it was an accident, or if everything was planned, as he said. Could this man who became an old man at the age of 25 change his fate? He asked me to write about it, and I am writing, holding back tears. I'm grieving for the man I once considered my best friend. I don't know if it's true, but I saw something in his eyes, something different from the desperation of a hunted animal. I think it was a pity. Maybe I was in one of his dreams, too.